thank you for joining me today with this amazingly interesting session on conversational AI for rapid vaccine uptake in terms of engagement, education, safety, management, as well as insights. My panelists today are Dr. Andrew Rutt, founder and CEO of My Meds and Me, and Richard Marcel, COO of Conversational Health. Welcome to you both. So I'll give a little bit of a background about both of you. So Dr. Rutt is actually a physician who specialized in endocrinology and genetics. He has worked in drug development across America, Europe, as well as Asia Pacific with Glaxo. He was previously head of safety at Glaxo GSK, where he had a lot to do with innovation and streamlining within the organization. Richard is the Chief Customer Officer for Conversational Health, and he has got 20 years experience building brands and businesses, both startups as well as multinationals across North America and the world. So prior to Conversational Health, Richard was really working in agency, brand innovation and digital transformation with companies such as Salesforce.com and Viva. But at heart, Richard is an industry insider, so he has been involved in founding numerous biotechs from Silicon Valley, as well as being in leadership positions across Johnson & Johnson businesses. So welcome to you both.
Thanks.
So today, really interesting topic, because the development of the COVID vaccines is really, it's been such a big effort, and it's been like a race to get the vaccines to market. So now we're at stage one of that relay where we've got the vaccines to market, but now stage two of the relay race begins, where we have to roll it out to 7 billion people globally somehow. So I think the key thing here, really, one of the key things we should talk about is the fact that, we've never done this before with this kind of speed or, volume. And so it's really something that we haven't got experience with. So let's start with Andrew. What do you think are the boundaries of our current knowledge in this kind of mass vaccination effort?
So if you take the accelerated clinical trial programs, I think what we've seen is the trials being completed in less than a year, products being launched. Therefore, even though we've had, say, 40,000 patients in the trials, maybe half of those have actually had active vaccine. So our boundaries of knowledge and our boundaries of knowledge based on things like ethnicity, age, background disease are very narrow. And indeed, if you look at the range of efficacy and safety findings from those, although they're great with some of the vaccines showing 95% efficacy, actually when we go into the real world, our information, the boundaries of our information, the boundaries of our knowledge are extremely narrow. And we've essentially done the first phase of our clinical experiment. And that clinical experiment has to continue now in the real world to proactively collect data on both the broader efficacy, but also importantly, the safety profiles across those various groups. Because at the moment, we just don't know, because we haven't had the sample sizes needed to study the profile across that population. So I think it is imperative that we do that proactively, because without that information, we can't really reassure or inform future vaccination subjects of what they will likely expect.
Interesting. And Richard, what do you think are the boundaries of our knowledge in terms of thinking about conversational AI and the process of really getting the information to the public?
Yeah, I think it's both a scale and a speed issue, Andre. I think as we look at COVID vaccines, never have we launched a product at such global scale so quickly and trying to obviously intercept full populations across the world. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the challenge for most customers, most manufacturers, most providers is the ability to engage that large amount of people simply and quickly. And again, there's the complexity as manufacturers are trying to make the product accessible, or frankly just available. That doesn't necessarily mean information is yet accessible. Yeah. So there's tremendous building of capabilities around just sheer delivery. but then communication and messaging to encourage really rapid uptake.
Yeah.
Real barriers, again, just related to size and speed at which this is happening in an industry that's probably a little risk averse and has fairly well-trodden, historical, somewhat analog systems of engagement and communication.
Yeah. And
I
then,
think, just building on what Richard says, is in some ways we've got information that is, let's call it robust as a result of trials, which the folks at Conversation Health can provide in a really neat way to the public and healthcare professionals. The other side then is, how do we get new information as fast as possible in the real world, analyze, synthesize it, and determine what insights we've got, and then feed that new information back to the public, to healthcare professionals, to government agencies in a reliable, accessible way in real time. So they don't go on Reddit or Facebook and get their latest unreliable information there. They get it through a trusted source.
Yeah. And so what kind
of... I was just going to build very quickly on that, and I think, and Andre, feel free to take us off topic or offline on some of this. But I also think there's also a really interesting, the flow and the sequencing of this will be very interesting. Today, the early deployments has been in special priority populations, which frankly don't necessarily or not had a choice in getting a vaccination. Old people homes and others, being home at the aged being a good example of that.
Yeah.
But as we move to your 60-year-olds, your 40-year-olds, your 20-year-olds, there's going to be a significant difference in hesitancy, knowledge, and others. To Andrew's point, messaging is hyper-critical for these groups, who today probably demonstrate the largest or most significant hesitancy. So the need to address them early on to move them off of that is absolutely critical.
So Dr. Bates, I'm going to apologise, I'm going to jump in, is that Richard raised a really, really good point around the differential benefit risk, and I know maybe we're going to cover that later, but I think it's worth covering in terms of the stratification of a population. So you can say, if I'm 85, which thankfully I'm not, my risk of getting COVID and dying and having severe illness of COVID is quite high. I mean, let's say 6-10%. Whereas if I'm 25, my risk of dying or having severe impact of COVID is 10, if not 100-fold lower. So therefore, the benefit risk for me getting a vaccine if I'm 85 is very different to the benefit risk of me taking that vaccine if I'm 25.
Yeah.
And therefore, the information flow has to be better, and also the information on those different groups around what their risk factors are and how those risk factors influence the outcome are really key, because otherwise we just won't reassure people. They'll go, and this is one of my theses. If you can't say you have no evidence for something happening if you've not collected that evidence. So if you have no data, you can't say, well, I've not seen anything bad happen. Well, you just haven't collected it.
Yeah.
So the reason for collecting the data diligently and then providing it back through platforms like Richard's is really to assure everyone that we've been really, we've scrutinized every possible aspect of the data, and therefore we are able to proactively reassure people.
That's a great segue into data, because we've talked about the process, but now data is a really critical part, particularly if we're speaking about AI and conversational AI. So we are going to need to collect the data pre-vaccination as well as post-vaccination. So could you, Andrew, speak to why collecting so much data pre and post-vaccination is so important?
So I think if we take, it's almost like in a clinical trial, we need to understand some of the background epidemiology to what happens anyway in the population, and that's why controlled trials are run. But we need to understand what the event rates are and what people are asking, what their questions are. I think then proactively collecting data after the first vaccine, or being able to collect the data after the first vaccine or after the second vaccine, depending on dosing intervals. Now we've got dosing intervals which are changing. So we went from the 3 to 4 weeks to 12 weeks in the UK. We've got the potential, unlikely, of mix and match vaccines. So we've got almost off-label use. So not only do we need data on-label use at those different steps, but we've got data now where the profile and the risk profile might be very different at those different stage gates, because we've never done that in clinical trials.
Yeah.
Also, people will do weird and wonderful things. People will take drugs of abuse, people will take paracetamol or acetaminophen, they will smoke, they'll drink. All those factors influence. We know they influence the body's immune responses. We know they influence how adverse events will take place. So we have to collect that data. So we can understand the profile and advise people in the future. Please, we need to get ahead of the curve. What we don't want to do is, if we're having 2 million vaccines or 500,000 in the UK, so let's say 2 million per day in the US, and let's say 1 in 1,000 of those people are reporting an adverse event. That's 2,000 adverse event reports every day. And if some of those are serious and we're not analysing and responding to them immediately, that means several hundred people within a week, if not more, are being exposed to unnecessary risk.
Yeah.
So that's the imperative. That's why we need to do this proactively.
Yeah. And what about from a conversational AI point of view, Richard, with the patients?
Absolutely, the same paradigms apply, right? Part of getting to this data very fast, and Andrew can double click on this afterwards. The amount of data has been very significant. The number of patient, consumers, caregivers, health professionals engaging, manufacturers particularly for information, for adverse events and product complaints, has been high, probably in excess of what most had planned for. And I think the danger is also making sure that we don't overwhelm safety systems and not report fast enough. That reporting is critical to re-informing consumers and healthcare professionals on the latest and greatest data. Certainly to Andrew's point, there's been changing labels, monographs, therapy, treatments, and others. But there's also a lot of noise in the media. There's a lot of anti-vaxxer noise. There's just a lot of hysteria in the media. And I think the more and more quickly we can bring facts to the front end or consumer and HCPs, again, to provide proper information for treatment. But the other piece I'd say is in a fast-changing world, most consumers most physicians don't want to consume dozens of pages of content on a website that's hard to engage, and others. The power of conversational AI is simply, if I'm a physician, I can pick up my phone, my smartphone, and literally ask a manufacturer, hey, can I use, what's the dosing in this special population or extra consideration with comorbidity X? What does that look like? And it's an answer. And it is not a stream of content or a product information leaflet, it's an answer. So that's equally enabling for the physician who has complex patient cases. It's equally enabling for the pharmacist who has significant product handling concerns, issues, or questions. And by the same token, for that same consumer who's exposed to, I've got a cold after my first injection, what do I do now? Yeah. So again, making it really, really easy and practical for all customers to gain information is critical for treatment and reducing hesitancy.
And I would say, Richard, to me it's about trusted self-service. So how can we offer our consumers, the vaccination subjects, their carers, the healthcare professionals, a trusted self-service? And I think the other part is, once we've got that information flow, we then build on that information. I would say, and this will sound a bit cruel, in some ways benefit risk is individual. And so I really don't care if Richard responds or doesn't respond to a vaccine or has an adverse event to the vaccine. I care if I do. And the benefit risk at an individual level is very different to what we've seen in trials. And that will relate to my genetics, will relate to my lifestyle, etc., my other background diseases. And I think that's the piece that's important to quantify as we go forward, is how do we build that body of knowledge so that we understand the impact for future populations and can advise them appropriately about how should they take the vaccine, which vaccine's most appropriate, what might they see, and how do they minimize that risk in future.
Yeah,
I agree. And Andre, the one thing, so I'll step on that and amplify a little bit of that. The other piece that's really powerful in conversational AI, or just virtualizing and driving digital engagement is the speed at which we get the insights from the data.
Mm-hmm.
What's really good about COVID drugs or COVID treatment is the sheer volume of them on a daily basis provides real-time feedback to reinform commercialization efforts or education and engagement efforts.
Yeah.
So this is not a month-long, quarter-long process. Day in, day out, by geography, by age groups, whatever it may be, we get tremendous insights on a daily basis that can reinform how we manage our HCPs, our pharmacists, our consumers, and others. And that is a bit of a game changer and a little unusual. We never get this speed and size of data sets in much of anything we do.
Yeah. Interesting. And so what could pharma do to reassure people, given, there's a lot of things we don't know still about the safety of the vaccines as they're being rolled out?
I'll start. The first to me is that every vaccinee counts, every adverse event counts, every data analysis counts, and our strategy, and I think the strategy has to be communicated widely through pharma, is that they have to be seen to value that information and respond to that information. So the public has to be assured, we're collecting it and we're doing stuff with it, and we're going to let you know about what we're doing with it. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to communicate the new information through live platforms, to enable you to gather that information in real time in future. That is trusted. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do. Mm-hmm. What you don't want is the opposite, which is, we're doing stuff, we're not going to tell you about it, it's all very secret, and go and find out in future through social media. So I think we've got a real opportunity for pharma to build on the great work that they've done in getting the vaccine to market, to say, we're going to be really open about data collection, data analysis, and then information provision back to you.
Mm. And do you think, how will this change as the vaccinations progress?
Well, I think the first wave of now is almost, I don't know how many people have been vaccinated. It's about 8 million in the UK and probably close to 20 million in the US. So the first wave of vaccination is going to give us maximal information about what's going on. But the slight difficulty we've got is we've got several different classes of vaccines. We've got the mRNA vaccine from Moderna and Pfizer. We've got the DNA vaccine from AstraZeneca. Novavax is coming forward with the protein vaccine. Some have tripped over earlier because of technology and things didn't work out. So not only do we have the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccination program, but we've got multiple different classes of technology which will have different benefits, different risk profiles, different long-term risks. So what we're looking at the moment is immediate risks. Did I have a sore arm? Did I get an allergic reaction? Did I have a couple of days in bed afterwards? The future will be, what are the delayed reactions that we will see? And some will be completely unrelated to vaccination, but people will claim that they are. Yeah. So we have to be on top of that, saying what are the longer term impacts, as you know well from your work, is what might be long-term neurological effects. There might be none, because they might be COVID related, but we have to have that data to be able to compare to the background population.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so yes to all of that. I also think in the near term, in terms of next quarter, next 2 quarters, I also think our pharma companies our manufacturers are doing yeoman's work, a tremendous effort in trying to scale distribution and get to data. To Andrew's point, an informed patient makes for a better patient. An informed physician makes for a better physician. Our biggest challenge is bringing data as quickly as we can to the front and to the fray. I also think the challenge a little more societally for all of us, pharma is just but one player. I think pharma can certainly, or our manufacturers can bring great data that we then bring to providers and governments. And as we move, I think as a group, as we move from just trying to build availability and get beyond that and get beyond prioritization, I think a lot of those shared efforts move from logistics to communication and messaging and others. Yeah. And that's probably going to happen over the next 3 months. But all of us, providers, governments, and others, need data to dispel any myths or any market hesitancy.
Yeah. And then once you've got the data, technology comes into play. So how, I think we'll start with Andrew with this one, how can technology really address these challenges, particularly adverse event reporting?
So I think that there's still, despite where we are in whatever 2021, there is still a large reliance on manual, and by that I mean human processes within the drug safety world.
Yeah.
And we've just met this morning with one of the biggest providers of drug safety services globally, one of the top tier organizations, and they still receive data by email, PDF, etc. And though that data is still processed by human beings, of whom there is, believe it or not an infinite supply. And if those individuals, those trained individuals, are not available either to receive the calls or process the data, because there's lack of trained individuals, or dare I say, maybe they have COVID. So you could sort of, your pool is finite and then it's shrinking because of COVID. Yeah. You can't deal with the data. So scaling up human processes is always a challenge. I think the intelligent way, I mean, my belief as a physician, and I'm sure yours is if I want to know what's wrong with a patient, I ask the patient, not the nurse or the doctor down the road or their friend. I go to the source. So my belief in setting up technology is make that technology as focused on the vaccination subject, their carer, their nearest and dearest as possible. Make it as easy as possible for them to report the data in a structured, consistent way. Because guess what? Garbage in equals garbage out. No amount of AI post-processing can improve that initial data. It just doesn't work. So get that good data early on. Get get it in, process it in a very standardized way, make it available for analysis, and eliminate those human steps. That, I think, is the core. And then we've got a chance of those insights being then transposed to the information flow, which I think is the next wave, which then we can make the information available to patients.
Yeah. So I was going to say, could you speak to making it easy for that data to come from the patients?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's our thesis is wherever you are in the food chain, the starting point is the patient or the vaccination subject or their carer. So it could be a parent or a child or somebody who's elderly can provide that data through a digital interface. I think that's the core to make that data available, structured rapidly, and eliminate human steps.
Yeah.
I think that's essential, but then the analysis and the insights have to feed back through the information provision that I think Richard can come to.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to build, Andrew, a little bit on, we also have to be careful because COVID, or this stream of vaccination, is not a one and done. So to your point, we have to implement systems that are hyper responsive, efficient, fast, digital, so you can get real-time information. We're going to see, beyond vaccines, we're going to see a bunch of enabling adjuvant drugs that will help with recovery and others. Same paradigms will apply really mostly for HCP information consumption. But I also suspect that COVID is not a 2021 event. I suspect we'll see a number of new vaccine, new drugs, rolling vaccinations. Like it or not, we will need to develop muscle and reflex around managing mass inoculations, vaccinations like we've not done before, or what we used to do in children is now done at mass populations with new vaccines emerging every 3-6 months, or boosters that are modifying based on how the disease or the virus is also evolving.
Yeah.
So this is developing a whole new skill set around speed and throughput or ingestion of data, but also analysis to reinform everything from product development to the front patient and the physicians or the HCP system, the healthcare system needing to care for these individuals.
Yeah.
So I think there's another part, and it was a very interesting article in the Financial Times which I forwarded to Richard and the team, and I think it's around how technology is evolving in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think Richard's absolutely right. This is a catalyst for other things that are going to happen in the healthcare landscape. However, and I'll read the words of the correspondent. Worse still, there's little consistency in privacy standards, interoperability, or regulation. The end result is a cacophony of good intentions and meaningful contributions from tech companies, governments, academics, and non-governmental organizations that threatens to drown out the best ideas in a din of inefficiency. So I think our view, and we probably would say that, is if you're in this space and there's an emergency, why not use technology that's tried, tested, reliable, meets all the global data privacy standards, is hosted in a way that's scalable, has been shown to work, as opposed to some organizations feel, it's the time to build the new electric car. Probably not. It's probably time to use technology and refine the technology that is available and can be deployed at scale.
Yeah. And
it's interesting you say that too, Andrew. I was going to say, as you articulate that too, the most global actor in delivery care and certainly COVID vaccinations is manufacturers, who are by definition global and frankly relatively efficient at it. They could be, in the context of governments aren't global, and certainly providers are not interoperable in any way, shape, or form. This may be a phenomenal opportunity for our manufacturers, our life science industry, to be a bit of a catalyst for systems and process improvement in global safety reporting systems.
Yeah.
And what kind of technology would you suggest that because the conversational AI, for example, with your company, Richard, is capable of doing adverse event reporting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly, and again, conversational AI is a phenomenal capability to, again, just reduce and simplify information from making it accessible to compelling, right? A question, I get an answer, and I can move on. The power of the technology, though, is, and again, it's virtualizing humans, whether by text or by phone or IVR, in a way that's available 24/7 and others, which again, very helpful from an HCP or a consumer perspective. Underlying that, though, is all the richness of data, and not necessarily consumer customer level data, but the data in aggregate. What are our pharmacists struggling with? What are consumers struggling with? What are physicians struggling with? And how do we bring that to re-inform commercialization effort? To Andrew's point, adverse event detection is absolutely part of conversational AI. It has the ability to understand the context of a question, a query, and whatever not, identify it and flag it. Which is something that we can do far more consistently with technology than we can with humans, and by the way, without any limitations of scale, but then hand off to a technology like Andrew's in terms of just sheer processing for immediate data transfer, analysis, and classification, reporting, and others. The beauty is that, in theory, those technologies are completely limitless in terms of scaling and immediacy of transfer. I think that's game-changing for the entire industry.
It is, Richard, and I think there are opportunities, as Dr. Bates has said, in terms of how this can reshape the industry going forward, and I think that is something that will happen. I think there are opportunities which I think we're only just beginning to realise. Most of us think in English. Most of us are English speakers. Yet, a bulk of the world speaks other languages. And how do we make the technologies we provide available globally? So it's not, and I know the WHO and CEPI were trying to, launch vaccine initiatives, and I think quite rightly so, saying, countries who are resource poor, how do we make the vaccine available? But more importantly, also, once we've made that vaccine available, how do we ensure that we have communication and capture both the benefits and risks that occur very differently in other populations? Having worked in different parts of the world, it's very obvious that those jurisdictions will also say, well, what's it like in Japan? And you can see this happening right now. The Japanese regulators are saying, we want to know the impact, positive or negative, on our population before we license the product. Now, some of us in the West may say, why? But actually, if you're sitting in Japan, you know that the lifestyle, the genetics, everything around there is completely different, and it's a logical step. So we have to accommodate that. We have to be broad and appreciate that our solutions have to meet global needs, not just what we perceive as our UK or North American needs.
Interesting.
If I added one dimension to that, Andrew, too, the other thing, back to your question, Andre, one of the powers of technology, well, certainly digitization and virtualization, is the ability to scale up, certainly in size, but also languages.
Yeah.
So the technology, so a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if we had an event like that needed to scale up to 50, 100 countries over the course of a year, developing training the agents, the humans and others across multiple languages, and it would have been a year-long process. We can scale up technology in multiple languages, multiple literacy levels, and with different communication streams for a physician versus a consumer in weeks and months. We will stand up. So radically different in terms of being able to scale up size, regions, language, and level of content.
That's right. So Richard, I mean, just to give you, we were looking back at 2020 and say, what did we do? So we work in 84 countries in 14 languages. And, 14 languages cover a huge proportion of the global arena. If you take Chinese, Japanese, English, and the various European languages, plus 84 countries, as you say, to scale that with manual processes, it's just a non-starter.
Yeah. So what would be?
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and by the way, we're obviously passionate and excited about some of this work, as you can see. What to me is interesting, Andre, for you and your audience will be, it's interesting to see some of the lead manufacturers in this endeavor.
Yeah.
They are developing very unique muscle and capabilities about scale and digitization and virtualization of their business, and scale and speed in that respect. It will be interesting to see whether they're smaller manufacturers or new first time to commercialization manufacturers, or well-established large manufacturers. This is game-changing technology and capabilities that can be brought to future non-COVID applications. None of this starts and ends with COVID. This is organizational capacity, capability, speed that will provide competitive advantage to the handful of COVID manufacturers today.
Yeah, it's kind of like a whole digital transformation, basically, that's been enhanced by COVID for the organizational streamlining. So what would be your final thoughts on advice to a pharma company and to the general public on, what it's going to take to make this successful?
I mean, I'd almost go back to those first principles of, you want to have that data. You want to consider that the subject is important, the data is important, and the flow of data is important.
Yeah.
And I would go back to, so first I would say data is good, and be careful of being seduced by, these are low value reports, these are just a bunch of non-serious things. Actually embrace data and embrace that flow of data, because it's going to be the most powerful tool to enable you to address the naysayers, the litigators, the anti-vaxxers, whoever. You will have data because you'll be able to say, what? Everyone here, I collected 1 million data points and all I saw was people having a sore arm, saw nothing else. I would say, great. And so that's the first part, embrace data at source, embrace data at scale, and use trusted technologies. Don't try to be clever about building, let's build our own. I mean, I can build my own car. I'm sure Richard can. I think I prefer to buy it from BMW. It's generally a bit more reliable. So I think use trusted technology, and then act fast. Get that data. The real end game here is not a data collection pod. It's the generation of insights. It's saying, I want the data because I want to be able to generate meaningful insights as rapidly as possible, so that I can improve and manage the benefit risk across the population in the most intelligent way possible, so that I can have a trusted vaccination or other product out there in the market that's viable and is well used. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, here. And again, I'd say embrace technology broadly, I think is key here. That is because the scale and speed are like nothing we've seen before. I think for many of our manufacturers, I think it's to think of from a process perspective, maybe hitting a reset button to think through a little more broadly, aggressively than trying to refresh existing processes.
Yeah.
Existing processes weren't designed for this level of speed and scale simply.
Yeah.
So I think embracing technology is absolutely key. And then ultimately just sheer transparency with directly with their customer groups, all customer groups. I think again, we tend to think and view industry as B2B providers to HCPs or specifically to healthcare practitioners. The reality is that in this environment, we're opening up to all customer groups. And I think we have great data to share, great insights to share to drive better adoption, but ultimately just better health faster.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. It's such a fascinating topic. I know we could spend all day today on it, but I really appreciate both of your time today in discussing this. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.